Maybe we just can discuss this for a minute. I mean, what questions does this situation raise, and how do we think it's going to affect our practices in the future? Is that something you've had any chance to think about?
The ransomware or just the stay at home in general?
All of it, really.
I think one thing that I think that's going to come from all this is, I think this is going to make the practice of law a lot more efficient. I think we both recognized how lucky we were in Texas with the technological stuff that we had, TAMES, e-filing, the attorney portal. And I think that this just underscores how great that is and how much better equipped Texas lawyers are because of it. And I think that the emphasis on that type of stuff is going to continue. I think the Zoom trial proceedings, I think Zoom oral arguments, I'm certain that they're not going to replace old-fashioned court and old-fashioned oral arguments, but I think in a lot of cases they're going to be here to stay. In particular, judges in small towns, more remote areas, I think they appreciate being able to have advocates from all over. And I think, frankly, they haven't really talked about it too much, it's an access to justice issue. It's going to solve, hopefully, a lot of access to justice problems that our state had, because, we have so many rural and smaller communities that are just underserved by lawyers. And by allowing, I think, remote hearings and electronic proceedings like we've had, it really allows some attorneys from throughout the state to serve those communities in ways that they couldn't before.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think for me, what I would like to see come out of this is some things we've touched upon in prior episodes. If you've got to go somewhere for a 15 or 30-minute hearing, and you have to travel for half a day or stay overnight, this ties into the access to justice issue because it has to do with how expensive legal services are. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to travel to some remote location in West Texas, I've got to be compensated for the time that I'm spending doing that. And then the client's got to pay the expense. And then, the hearing might take literally 15 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. It is, there really is no denying that's doing that over Zoom is way more efficient and creates an efficiency that just really ought to take root. I'm trying to think of a good reason for opposing in that situation, allowing Zoom hearings to continue. And I think the judges in those more remote locations, I can't speak for them, but if I were them, I would be inclined to want to keep that just because you could be so much more efficient in the running of your docket, I would think.
I think that's right. I think, there are probably some situations where witness credibility may be at issue, or you've got evidentiary stuff that needs to be in person. I think there are plenty of reasons you can come up with why it might not work, but I think you're right. Make it kind of the general understanding that the court is encouraging of remote proceedings when available and applicable. And I think you're going to find a lot of attorneys take advantage of that.
Right. And there's just so much a greater sheer number of hearings that take place in trial courts across the state. I don't know that remote oral arguments are really going to take hold long-term for appellate matters unless there's some extenuating circumstance. It's interesting, and it will be interesting to watch whether that happens. One thing I would really like to see, though, even if remote arguments don't take hold, we've got a handful of intermediate courts here in our state that record arguments. And when those recordings are available to the advocates, it really is a big benefit. I know the third court publishes the audio, within a day or so of the argument. And I really enjoy, it's beneficial to my client to be able to hear the argument if they couldn't make it live. And then it's beneficial, think about all the times you've told in response to a question, well, hey, Judge, with the court's permission, we'll submit a supplemental brief on that question and follow up to your question. But if you're the only person at the lectern and not taking note, my brain works 100 miles an hour when I'm in an oral argument. And it's just easier to get the details if you can go back and refer to a recording and really listen to the nuance of the question and try to figure out what's really being asked. And I think, if we can pipe in video, even if we don't stick with video, it would be nice, again, another access to justice related issue, if all of our intermediate courts would record arguments and make them available. I think that would be a big plus, not necessarily related to coronavirus or ransomware, but just a kind of one of the things that's on my technological wish list.
Well, and to your point earlier in a different context, I feel like the intermediate courts are a little bit of a black hole for the general public. They don't really know what they do or what they are. And so if you have those videos available where you can actually see what an oral argument is, I think it goes a long way toward educating the public about what the system is about. Because, 9 out of 10 people, 9.5 out of 10 people probably couldn't tell you who's on the Texas Supreme Court. But I think below that, 999 out of 1,000 couldn't tell you who's on an intermediate court or where they're even located.
No, that is so true. That is so true. And we see that with the Texas Supreme Court arguments that have been now broadcast live and webcast and recorded and made available later for many years. I think that is a giant advantage for anyone to be able to look at an oral argument that takes place in the Texas Supreme Court. And so I'd like to think that we could get that level even of technological service into our intermediate courts, but I know that there are budgetary reasons why it hasn't happened, and our budget's going to be tighter than ever going forward now. But the technology also has gotten a lot cheaper, so I would sure love to see that happen. If anyone ever puts me in charge and gives me an unlimited budget, that would be something I'd love to see. But
yeah, it's interesting with Thames being down, all the things that I realize that I do in cases. A lot of time, if I find a case that I'm researching on Westlaw from an intermediate court, sometimes I'll use it to check the subsequent history, because you can't tell from Westlaw in a fairly recent case if anything's been done. But also just going in a case that's similar to mine and reading the briefs, see what they presented. That makes a big difference to be able to see what they put in, to look for the names of counsel who argued, maybe look for potential amicus support from other cases. You can do a lot of cross work on Thames that presents a lot of value, and not having access to that is kind of frustrating, because you do miss that. And that's a great technological advantage we have.
Oh, I totally agree. And when txcourts.gov started coming back, and I was able to actually see like the Third Court of Appeals website, the real website again, I had this tinge of real appreciation for what we had. And what's kind of sad about it, I mean, you and I know all about this stuff because we're in it day in, day out. I think, there's a lot of Texas practitioners who don't understand and don't know all these resources that are available to them, like the attorney portal, for example, and case mail. I mean, things that to me are kind of appellate lawyer 101 sort of topics. They're must-haves. And so, to the extent that those lawyers have, because of the coronavirus situation, if they've had appeals and they've, been forced to be online more and educate themselves more, I mean, that's a potential upside to all this very strange situation that we've been in for the last couple of months. But, having cases available online and having as much information available online as possible in our age, I think is critical. And we have commended OCA and the Supreme Court many times in our discussions on the podcast and in our episodes so far. But I think their role has just become, highlighted as even more important than we could have imagined, just because in the last 2 weeks, we just haven't had this information.
No, I totally agree. And I think the fact that it's out there, you realize how much legitimacy it lends both to the judiciary and then to all of us and the jobs that we do, because people really can kind of transparency with what we do. Hey, I'm filing a brief. Okay, cool. What does that mean? But well, here's the link. Go look at it. You can actually see what I've done. And people who are law students who are studying can go and look, hey, these people seem like they know what they're talking about.